When Mason Alder brought the puppy home, he expected chaos. He expected chewed shoes, midnight whining, tiny accidents on the rug, and the kind of joyful destruction that makes you laugh even while you're cleaning it up. What he didn't expect was fear, real fear, so sharp it made the puppy's whole body tremble. The puppy's name became Noodle because Mason's 8-year-old daughter Ava said he was all legs and wiggles like spaghetti. Noodle was a mixed-breed rescue, about 4 months old, tan with a white chest and floppy ears that didn't know which direction to commit to. He was sweet, gentle, eager to follow Ava around like she was the centre of gravity, until water showed up. The first time Mason noticed it, it was nothing dramatic. He'd filled Noodle's water bowl and accidentally sloshed a little onto the floor. Noodle froze. Not the normal, "What's that?" freeze. His ears pinned back, his tail dropped, and his eyes went round. He stared at the small puddle like it was a living thing. Then, without warning, he scrambled backwards so hard he slid on the tile. Ava gasped. "Noodle?" The puppy pressed his body against the wall, trembling, eyes fixed on the puddle. Mason blinked, confused. Okay, that's weird. He wiped it up quickly, thinking maybe Noodle hated slippery floors. Maybe he'd never seen tile. But it happened again with the sink faucet. Mason turned on the kitchen tap to wash dishes. The water rushed, bright and loud in the quiet house. Noodle bolted. He didn't run playfully. He fled. Down the hall, nails skittering, a panicked whine escaping him like he couldn't stop it. Mason turned the faucet off instantly. Hey, it's okay. Ava ran after him, finding Noodle under the coffee table, body pressed flat to the floor, shaking so hard the table legs rattled. Ava reached slowly, voice soft. "It's just water, buddy." Noodle's eyes stayed wild. Mason crouched beside them, heart tightening. He'd adopted Noodle from a local rescue after Ava begged for a dog for a year. The rescue paperwork had been vague. Found stray, estimated age, shy but friendly. Nothing about trauma. But now, seeing Noodle's reaction, Mason felt that cold certainty settle in. Something had happened to this puppy before he ever came home, and water was part of it. Over the next week, they learned the rules of Noodle's fear. The sound of a shower turning on made him sprint to the farthest room. The sight of the garden hose in Mason's hand made him cower behind the patio chair. A rainstorm made him pace and pant, unable to relax even with Ava petting him. He would drink from his bowl, but even then he did it like he expected punishment. Quick, tense, then backing away. Mason called the rescue organization. The woman on the phone sighed sadly. "We don't know his full history," she admitted, "but we've seen dogs like him before. Sometimes they've been sprayed, dunked, or harmed with water." Mason closed his eyes, anger boiling in his chest. "He's a puppy." "I know," she said quietly. "Go slow. Don't force. Make it safe." Mason tried. He bought a gentle sprayer bottle for training and threw it away the same day because Noodle panicked just seeing it. He tried coaxing Noodle into the bathtub with treats. Noodle wouldn't even step into the bathroom. Even a damp towel made him flinch. Ava took it personally at first, in the way kids do. "He doesn't trust me," she whispered one night, curled on the couch with Noodle's head on her lap. Mason stroked her hair. "He trusts you more than anyone," he said. "Fear doesn't mean he doesn't love you." Ava looked down at Noodle's ears, her face serious in a way that made Mason's throat tighten. "I'm going to fix it," she said. Mason almost laughed. "Sweetheart, it's not something you fix in a day." Ava didn't argue, she just nodded like she'd filed the information away and would ignore the timeline anyway. The next Saturday, Mason planned to take Noodle to the vet for a checkup. Ava insisted on coming. Noodle hopped into the car happily until they hit a pothole and a water bottle rolled on the floor, sloshing. Noodle yelped and tried to climb into Ava's lap. Ava wrapped her arms around him, whispering, "I've got you. I've got you." The vet, Dr. Priya Shah, listened carefully as Mason explained the water fear. Dr. Shah nodded slowly. Phobias can be deep, she said, especially if there's trauma. We can work on desensitization, slow exposure, positive association. But it takes time. Ava sat upright. What if he has to swim someday? Dr. Shah smiled gently. He doesn't have to swim, but it would be good if water didn't terrify him. Ava's eyes narrowed in thought. On the drive home, Mason noticed Ava was quiet in a way that meant her brain was spinning. That afternoon, Ava disappeared into her room and returned with something Mason didn't expect. A small plastic kiddie pool, empty, dry. Mason stared. Where did you even get that? Ava's cheeks flushed. It was in the garage, from when I was little. Mason glanced at Noodle. The puppy's ears had already pinned back at the sight of the pool, even though it was empty. Ava set it down in the living room, on a towel, like she was setting up a science experiment. Noodle, she said softly. Look, it's just a bowl, a big bowl. Noodle stared at it like it was a trap. Mason opened his mouth to stop her, then hesitated. Ava wasn't charging him toward water. She wasn't turning on a hose. She was introducing it like an object. Ava sat beside the empty pool and placed a treat on the rim. Noodle didn't move. Ava placed another treat closer. Still nothing. Then she did something Mason didn't expect at all. She crawled into the empty pool herself. She sat cross-legged inside it like it was the safest place in the world and held out a treat in her palm. Noodle stared. Ava smiled, small and calm. See, nothing bad happens in here. Mason's heart tightened. Noodle took one hesitant step forward, then another. He sniffed the pool edge, nose trembling. Ava didn't move, didn't reach, didn't pressure. She just sat there, being safe. Noodle finally stretched his neck and took the treat from her palm, then backed away quickly. Ava's eyes shone like she'd just discovered fire. "That's it," she whispered. "That's the thing." Mason frowned. "What thing?" Ava didn't answer. She looked at the pool. Then she looked at the kitchen sink. And Mason realized, too late, that Ava had an idea. Mason expected Ava to try to fill the kiddie pool. That would have been the obvious next step. But Ava didn't do the obvious thing. She did something so small, so strangely thoughtful, that Mason didn't recognize its power until he saw Noodle's body language change. Ava went to the kitchen and came back with a cup. Not a bucket, not a hose, not a roaring faucet, a cup. She set it beside the pool and looked at Mason. "No loud water," she said, as if she'd been taking notes. Mason nodded slowly. "Okay." Ava walked to Noodle, who was watching from the hallway, and sat down on the floor at his level. She didn't call him over. She didn't tug his collar. She just sat and waited. Noodle's tail flicked nervously. His paws shifted. He wanted to be near her, but the pool's presence still tugged at his fear. Ava held up a treat and placed it on the floor halfway between Noodle and the pool. Noodle crept forward and ate it. Then she placed another treat closer to the pool. Noodle crept again. Step by step, she guided him, never forcing, only letting him choose. Eventually, Noodle stood at the rim, sniffing, ears pinned but not fleeing. Ava reached for the cup. Mason tensed. "Ava!" She looked up. "I know," she said quickly. "Tiny." Then she did the one thing. Instead of pouring water into the pool, she dipped her fingers into the cup of water, then touched her own wrist, like she was painting herself with water. She smiled at Noodle. "See? It's just cool." Then she dipped her fingers again and touched Noodle, once, on the top of his paw. Just a dot of water, so little it barely changed his fur. Noodle flinched, hard. His whole body tightened like a spring, and Mason's heart lurched, ready for the bolt. But Ava didn't chase him with more water. She didn't try to comfort him too fast. She did something even smarter. She stayed still and put a treat on the floor right next to his paw, right next to the tiny wet spot. Noodle's eyes locked on the treat, then on the wet fur, then back to Ava. His breathing sped. He took the treat. And nothing bad happened. Ava whispered, "Good boy." Mason stared, because it was the first time Noodle had been touched by water and hadn't run. He didn't relax, but he stayed. Ava repeated it once more, another tiny dot on the paw, then treat. Noodle trembled, but he stayed. Mason felt his chest tighten with hope. Over the next 2 days, Ava turned it into a routine, like brushing teeth. Tiny water dot, treat, pause, praise, then 2 dots, then a slightly damp finger swipe on his foreleg, always with the same calm presence, always with control. Noodle could step away whenever he wanted, and sometimes he did. He'd back off, shake his paw, and stare at her like she was a strange little scientist. Ava never punished him for leaving. She just tried again later. By Wednesday, Noodle would tolerate Ava's damp fingers on his paw without trembling. By Friday, he would tolerate a light wipe on his shoulder. Mason couldn't believe it. "You're doing magic," he told Ava quietly one evening. Ava shook her head, serious. "It's not magic. It's tiny, like Dr. Shah said. He needs tiny." Mason swallowed the lump in his throat. Then came the moment that felt impossible. It was Saturday again, exactly 1 week after the pool first appeared, when Ava decided to add the next step. But she still didn't fill the pool. She poured a small amount of water into it, not inches, not even enough to splash, just a thin layer that barely covered the bottom. Then she put her hand in it herself. She swirled her fingers, making a soft sound, nothing like a faucet, nothing like a shower. Noodle watched from 3 feet away, ears pinned, but he didn't flee. Ava placed treats along the rim and inside the pool. Inside. Mason held his breath, watching Noodle's chest move fast. Ava didn't call him. She sat down on the floor beside the pool, her hand still in the shallow water, and started talking to him in a normal voice about her day. School, math, a girl who stole her eraser, silly kid stuff. It was so normal it made the scene feel surreal. Noodle crept closer, drawn by her voice and the smell of treats. He sniffed the rim. He took a treat. Then, very slowly, he lifted one paw and placed it inside the pool. The shallow water touched his paw. Noodle froze. Mason's heart slammed. Ava didn't move. She didn't react like this was the big moment. She just kept talking, calm as a lullaby. Noodle stared down at his paw in the water. Then he took another step. Now both front paws were in. He stood like that, trembling slightly, eyes wide, as if expecting the water to become punishment. But it didn't. It stayed quiet, shallow, safe. Ava smiled softly and slid a treat closer, inside the pool. Noodle took it. He swallowed. Then he did something that made Mason's breath catch. Noodle shifted forward and stepped fully into the pool. All 4 paws. In water. Mason felt his eyes sting. Ava reached out slowly, dipped her hand in the water, and then, without splashing, gently touched Noodle's chest. Noodle flinched. Then he exhaled. Not a panicked exhale. A long one, like something inside him loosened. Ava whispered, "You're okay." Noodle looked at her, ears still back, but his eyes were different now. Less terror, more confusion, like he was realizing he'd been scared of something that could also be safe. Mason swallowed hard. "Ava?" Ava didn't look at him. She was focused on Noodle's face like it was the only thing in the world. Noodle stood in the water for a full minute. Then he stepped out. He shook once, and instead of running away, he came back to Ava and pressed his head into her lap. Mason's throat tightened painfully, because the impossible thing wasn't that Noodle stood in water. The impossible thing was that he trusted it enough to stop running. But the real test, the one Mason didn't even know was coming, arrived the next day. Sunday morning brought heat. Not summer heat, but the kind of warm spring day that made Mason open windows and think maybe they'd go to the park. Ava asked immediately if they could take Noodle somewhere fun. Maybe, Mason said. We'll see how he does. Ava's eyes flicked to the kiddie pool. He did water, she said proudly. Mason smiled. He did tiny water. Ava didn't argue. They went to the park around noon. It was a family park with a playground, a walking trail, and, this mattered, a shallow creek running along the edge, usually just a trickle. Mason kept Noodle on a leash, watching his body language closely. Noodle was nervous around noises, but Ava's presence anchored him. He walked beside her like he belonged there. They reached the creek area, where smooth rocks created a shallow pool no deeper than a few inches. Ava stopped, looking at the water. "Tiny water?" she whispered. Mason's stomach tightened. "Ava, we don't have to." "I know," she said quickly. "He chooses." Noodle noticed the creek and stopped, his ears pinned, his tail lowered. Mason expected him to pull away, but then Ava did the same thing she'd done at home, the same one thing. She didn't pull him forward. She didn't splash. She didn't toss him in. She simply crouched at the edge, dipped her fingers into the creek, and touched her own wrist, smiling like it was no big deal. Then she placed a treat on a rock near the edge. Noodle stared. Ava kept her voice normal, talking about a bird she saw and a swing she wanted to try, like water was just part of the background. Noodle inched forward and took the treat. Then he backed away slightly, looking at the creek. Ava didn't chase him. She placed another treat near the edge. Noodle stepped forward again. His paw touched the wet rock. He froze. Mason stopped breathing. Ava whispered, "Good." Noodle took the treat. Then he did something Mason wasn't ready for. He stepped into the creek. One paw, then two. The water flowed around his toes, cool and gentle. Noodle's body trembled, but he didn't bolt. Ava stayed calm. Then, from behind them, a group of kids ran past, shouting, and a sudden splash of water hit the rocks farther upstream. Noodle startled hard, head whipping, body tensing. Mason's heart lurched. "Ava!" But Ava did it again. The one thing. She didn't grab the leash and yank him away. She didn't scold the kids. She simply put her hand on Noodle's shoulder, steady pressure, a calm anchor, and whispered, "Look at me." Noodle's eyes flicked to her. Ava held a treat in her palm, right under his nose. Noodle sniffed. He took it. He exhaled. The panic wave passed through him and didn't take him with it. Mason felt something in his chest crack open, because the impossible wasn't swimming. It wasn't some movie moment where the dog suddenly loved water. The impossible was this. A frightened animal chose trust over fear, because a child had shown him how to take fear in pieces small enough to carry. Noodle stood in the creek for a moment, then stepped out and shook. Ava laughed, delighted, and Noodle, still damp, did a tiny hop like he was proud of himself. A couple nearby noticed and smiled. Mason caught snippets. Oh, he was scared, and she... "That's so sweet. Look at the puppy." Ava leaned close to Noodle and whispered, "You did it." Noodle licked her fingers. Wet, muddy, real. Mason stared at them, and he realized something that hit him like a quiet truth. Noodle's fear had never been about water itself. It had been about losing control, about loud, sudden, overwhelming things. Ava's one thing was giving him control back, one tiny drop at a time, until water wasn't a threat. It was just water. Back home, as the sun lowered and the day softened, Ava brought the kiddie pool outside and filled it a little more than before, still shallow, still safe. Noodle walked up and sniffed it. Then, without prompting, he stepped in. He didn't tremble, he didn't bolt. He simply stood there, tail wagging cautiously, as if he was still surprised by his own courage. Mason's eyes stung again. Ava grinned at her dad. "See?" she said. "Tiny." Mason swallowed hard and nodded. "Yeah," he whispered. "Tiny, and everything changed.